Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulihil Kareem. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think we're pretty much on time. As you know, my name is Harris Irfan. I'm a trustee here at Shah Jahan, and I'm an investment banker by trade. Many years ago, about 10 years ago, I set up on my own, and I run a financial services firm now. This is a 4-part course. So it's not intended to be an academic course. It's a discussion, I hope. I hope you all are able to interact and ask me questions as we're talking. I don't want this to be a monologue. I don't want to be just kind of giving you some textbook theory of Islamic finance. Everything that I say for the next 4 weeks will be based on my personal experience in the space. So, and you should know, and you will come to know, that I have some, let's call them, they're controversial views on the industry, but then I'm an insider. There are differences of opinion and there are legitimate differences of opinion. And in my space, what I see from lay people is that there's a lot of resistance or antipathy to Islamic finance, often based on a misunderstanding of fiqh, and yet the sentiment is one that I agree with. So I think that there is a disconnect between what the industry is offering to customers, to the general public, and what the general public actually want, and their values and their culture. So that's kind of the theme for the next 4 weeks. By the way, we miss a week in the middle. So it's this week will be an introduction to Islamic finance. In fact, I'll just read you through. I left my paper at the back, so I'm going to go and grab it. That's okay, I'll grab mine. Yeah, so we've got the first week, which is Introduction to Islamic Finance. So today we're going to talk about, essentially what is prophetic economics, what is Riba, the birth of modern Islamic finance, how the industry evolved, the arrival of the international banks, what the scholars do, and the current state of Islamic finance in the UK. Next week, we're going to do halal finance, savings, and investment. So I think that's one of the things that many of you are very interested in, because I get asked all the time about mortgages and pensions, and the sister here was talking about pensions earlier. We're going to talk about all of those things, plus that controversial topic, which is, are Islamic banks true? I say true to prophetic ideals. This often gets reduced in titles of YouTube videos to, is Islamic banking halal? Which I think is a very unfair question, because, you can say yes, you can say it's halal because the ulama have signed off, and the industry uses various financial structures which are based on fiqh al-mu'amalat, which is the jurisprudence of transactions, of commercial transactions. So it's a very extreme statement to say that Islamic banking is haram. And often my podcast videos are titled with that. That's not what I would say personally. But what I would ask is the question, is Islamic banking true to prophetic ideals? I think that's a much fairer way of phrasing that. So we'll cover that next week. You don't have to know anything about finance, by the way. You're here because I hope you have an interest in current affairs, geopolitics, maybe you are a business owner, maybe you have an interest in your personal finance, but I don't expect you to know necessarily the difference between shares and bonds. I'll give you a very brief introduction to what that is next week. So you'll have an understanding of what it means to invest in exchange-traded funds, what a derivative is, what a fund is, and so on. So we'll be talking about investing our savings in a halal way next week. The week after is called Fixing a Broken Economy. And in that one, I'm going to go a little bit more back to basics, like what is money? What is money? And I want to answer that question almost from an anthropologist's point of view, not an economist's point of view. We'll talk about high time preference versus low time preference. The social effect of high time preference. Why GDP is a poor measure. Does somebody want to help out? I think, no, it's open. Why GDP, or gross domestic product, this number that you hear on the news, is a poor measure of human progress. We'll talk about the magic money tree, how governments create money by printing it through central banks. We'll talk about that famous hadith about gold being hand to hand, silver hand to hand. What is meant by financialization? You may hear this term every now and then. What is sound money? Why is sound money an Islamic concept? We'll talk about cryptocurrency. We'll talk about Bitcoin. That will be in the third week. And then finally, in the fourth week, we're missing out a week between 3 and 4. But in the fourth week, we'll talk about the direction of Islamic finance. And we will answer those questions that I was asking at the beginning, which is, are Islamic banks failing our communities? Do they share our values? And what direction the industry should take. And also, for some of you who are interested in careers in Islamic finance, we'll talk about that as well in the final session. So let's get started on the first one. We have an hour and a half, but and really my slides are not, these are not textbook slides. There are not going to be lots of notes on these slides. They're basically going to be mostly a picture on one page. And you should feel free to stick your hand up and ask me in the middle. It may be that we cover some particular topic in great detail at a later stage, but there's no harm in having an interactive discussion. I'd prefer that. And that's why I wanted this to be in person and not online. We are going to upload this to YouTube afterwards, but I'd rather be able to, interact and have a proper session with people. Right, let's get started. What is prophetic economics? So I'm going to ask you the question, what do you think I mean, or what do you think we mean by the word prophetic economics? Does anyone have a possible answer to that? Come on, don't be shy. Yeah.
Kind of the economics in the time of the Prophet, so time and how things were done then.
Yeah. What do we think that was? How do we think it worked?
I think the best way I can put it is probably it was sort of a capitalistic way, but a fair way where people were, you could sell things and make money and actually make money in a fair way, and it didn't treat anyone. There was no disadvantages like today where Riba, you're creating money basically out of nowhere.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, literally it is trade and not riba. Allah made trade halal for us and riba haram for us. And that's very well explained. I think prophetic economics is going back to the roots of trade. And we've created this entire industry around trade that we call finance to lubricate trade, which is a good thing, to make it happen. But it's ended up becoming an industry by itself, which is more important than the real economy. So I'm going to use these terms, the financial economy and the real economy. And the financial economy is all these bits of paper we shuffle around on stock exchanges, derivative transactions, which I'll explain what those are later. And it's an economy that is worth many times what the real economy is worth. And what's the real economy? The real economy is it's factories making widgets, it's manufacturing goods, it's producing services, it's getting your hair cut in the barber, right? That's a real economy business that does something real in society. So we've got this real economy that does real things and makes real things and gives real services. And we've got this financial economy, which is supposed to serve the real economy, but actually ended up becoming the master of the real economy. So it's an asymmetric relationship. It's not a healthy partnership. This is a very unhealthy partnership between the two. So when we talk about prophetic economics, what we're saying is, how was trade done in the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Well, how was it done? So I think the answer is that he himself was a mudarib, a manager of people's money. So his first wife, who was one of the most senior and powerful merchants in the city of Mecca, gave him her capital to trade. So she is the Rabb al-Mal, the owner of the wealth, the lord of the wealth. She's the investor. So the Rabb al-Mal gives the money to the mudarib, and there's this man, and his name is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he has his reputation as being the trustworthy one, al-Amin, and he's good with capital, and so she gives him her money, and she says, go and trade it. And they agree a purpose of this trade, and the mudarib leaves the city wall with the caravan trade, takes his whatever, spices or textiles, trades them somewhere else, exposed to the risks of market prices, of bad weather, of banditry, all the risks that come with trading, brings his goods back into the city wall, trades them in the souk, makes a profit because he's good at what he does, and then shares the profit with his Rabb al-Mal, the investor, in a predetermined way, whatever that split is that's been agreed with them. And now you have this healthy relationship between the investor and the investee, the manager of the money, where they agree to share the labor and the investment and then share the profits from that, or losses. Your capital is at risk. And this is a very key point that we've missed in the Islamic finance industry today. Actually, it's not helped because Muslims want to have their cake and eat it. So they say, how can I, have an investment in my business where, I'll pay you a rate, but if my business fails, the investor doesn't want to share the profits. So there's this idea that, Islamic finance should somehow be a replication of the conventional financial services industry. And what I hope to demonstrate and argue over the next 4 weeks is that actually we should be trying to build an alternative financial system rather than trying to reverse engineer what the current system already does, which I think is a huge problem right now. So Prophetic Economics, I'm just going to read you something from Ghazali, because in Islam, I think you probably already know you can't create money out of money. We call that riba. The act of having money is not a valid basis on which to become richer in and of itself. Having money should not make you more rich just because you have money. So capital has to be deployed into these, what I call real economy, socially useful activities, and profits and losses to be shared. So Ghazali said, it becomes easy for the financier to earn more money on the basis of interest without bothering himself to take pains in real economic activities. The interests of humanity cannot be safeguarded without real trade, skills, industry, and construction. This is really interesting because this is, 800 years ago, or 700. Allah created dirhams and dinars so that they may be circulated between hands and act as a fair judge between different commodities and work as a medium to acquire other things. I think that's really interesting because what Ghazali is saying is that money is not a commodity to be traded. Money is not the thing that you trade. I'll give you 100, you give me 110 back. The real goods and services are the things that you trade, right? The widgets that you make in your factory. So Ghazali is saying money's purpose is to establish the value of other things. This table costs £100. This microphone costs £200. Those pounds are there to measure value as a medium of exchange, rather than something that I trade amongst us. Whenever I trade cash flows, whenever I trade debt, whenever you trade bonds on the financial markets, you're trading money. You've made money the commodity to be traded. And Ghazali is saying that's not the purpose of money. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about prophetic economics. Let's talk about riba. What is riba? Anyone? Interest is one way of describing it. Anything else? Exploitation, yeah, that's good. Injustice, exploitation. Anything else? Does anyone know of fiqh? I want to be careful because for the 4 weeks, I don't want to spend too much time on fiqh itself because that's a specialist subject. I'm not a scholar. I've worked with enough scholars to be able to answer most of their questions, but I would never pretend that I'm qualified and credentialed to do so. So there is a difference. A bit like, in my job, I write legal contracts, even though I'm not a lawyer. And dare I say it myself, I've spent so many years doing it, I can probably do it better than most lawyers. That doesn't mean I'm qualified to be a lawyer. So in the same way, I want to try and avoid talking about fiqh in a very textbook, theoretical, academic way over the next 4 weeks. But there will be times that we do have to touch on this subject. So does anyone know what types? There's 2 types of riba actually in fiqh. Does anyone know what those 2 types are? No? Okay, so let's get them up on screen. So we have the riba of delay, riba al-nasiyah, which is the charging of interest on a loan. So you say, here's £100. After a year, I want you to give me £110. So that £10 is the riba of delay. The second type of riba is the riba of excess, which is a sort of unjust transaction. It's riba al-fadl. And this is the exchange of commodities of differing values. So if I say, I'm going to give you, a bag of a certain quality of dates, and you're going to give me a bag of a different quality of dates back, then I've exchanged commodities of differing qualities, and it's an unjust transaction because I didn't use a medium of exchange in between, being money, to value those 2 bags. So we've potentially created uncertainty or injustice or potentially exploitation in that transaction. So that's the riba of excess, riba al-fadl. So those are the two sort of dictionary definitions of riba. And maybe a more fundamental question to ask is, why is riba haram? Why has it been made haram for us? Does anyone have any views on that?
Yes, I think because it leads to vast inequality, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
It extracts wealth from the people in society to
Yeah.
levels like...
I think that's the main reason.
Elon Musk levels.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an excellent example of how riba, which is manifested in a sort of steroidally turbocharged financialization system that we live in today, has allowed some people to get rich beyond, I mean, it's beyond belief really that an individual could be worth $1 trillion. You know, so I'm in danger, whenever I hear Elon Musk, I'm in danger of going off on a tangent, and I need to try and avoid that. But, you know, this is a man who embodies the worst of humanity as far as I'm concerned. Because if he really wanted to solve world hunger, he has the wealth to do it right now in his pocket. But he doesn't really want to do that, right? So this idea that a few individuals can get richer as a result of just possessing money by itself, because you can make money out of money without any real industry, hands doing work, which was what Ghazali was saying. They're not hands doing work, it's money sitting in a bank account. And the more you have, the more the banks want to give you, which is the irony. I mean, that doesn't make any sense either. So riba is fundamentally unjust. It creates wealth and value for those who are wealthy and valuable already. And the ones who are at the bottom of this pyramid, the ordinary worker, are the ones who suffer from, for example, inflation. Riba leads to inflation. So I'm now getting ahead of myself because actually this is week 3, where I'm going to be talking about the concept of sound money and why sound money is a natural barrier against riba, and why what we call unsound money, and I'm going to explain, you know, what that means eventually, is or the money that we have today in the world. We call it fiat money. Fiat means by decree. So all of the pounds or the dollars or the euros or the yens that everybody uses in the world today are money that has been decreed to be money by a government. It's not a natural money. It hasn't arisen by the concurrence of society saying we all want to use this money, which gold was before. So when we have non-natural money that is decreed by a government, it leads to riba. And here's the thing that I'm going to say, which is a fact, but very little known amongst people, which is fiat money, money that we use today, pounds in our pocket, are by definition created through debt. All fiat money today is riba-based money. The entire monetary system that we all exist in and that we all transact on is based on haram riba, which is, people say, well, how does it make sense? How are we allowed to use pounds? Why are we using pounds? Have you ever, I'm interested to know this actually, has anyone ever heard a khutbah on Friday talking about riba? Any hands? Anyone who's had a, yes? We had one there.
Not in this country.
Okay.
In Pakistan.
Okay, really? Okay, interesting.
There was an imam who went on a few lectures about riba and all that. And got to a point where some people actually stood up in the masjid to, you know, beat the hell out of him. So I think he just walked away because, you know how things can, he was quite smart in that sense, so he
Yeah.
kind of walked away from the situation. But he kept going on regardless, but yeah.
It's interesting to me that we don't talk about this. It's one of the most heinous sins. Riba is one of the most heinous sins alongside shirk and murder and other sins. And yet I don't think I can ever recall hearing a khutbah on this on Fridays. I think one of the reasons for this is we're embarrassed as a community. You know, we all have, you know, standard bank accounts, and we finance our houses, we have mortgages. There's also in Islam the doctrine of necessity. You know, there are some waivers from ulama that say in certain circumstances in certain countries, you're allowed to have an interest-bearing mortgage in order to finance your home. You know, we all participate in the modern banking and monetary system, whether we like to or not. Our salaries get paid into, you know, Barclays and Lloyds and NatWest and whatever. So, you know, we can't avoid it. We're all touched by it. Some of us, a little bit more than others. Some of us run multi-billion-dollar companies and leverage the acquisition of other companies with riba. Anyone aware of the ownership of Asda, big supermarket chain? This was bought by, yeah, it was bought by a couple of Muslim brothers up in, was it Blackburn or Bolton? I can't remember. I remember when they did it, they took out a £6 billion loan. And it was, of course, a normal Riba-based loan from Barclays, I think it was. And I remember thinking at the time, these guys have the power to tell the banks that we don't want it done this way, we want it done an alternative way. They could have done that if they wanted to, but they chose not to. And I don't know if you notice what's happening to Asda right now. It's completely unraveling. The entire thing has been a disastrous private equity-like play, a financial engineering play. And this is a function of the modern monetary and financial system that we live in today, which I call financialization, which is the proliferation of debt and debt-like services. So when we live in a monetary and financial system where every financial transaction directs us towards riba, then we end up in a situation where perfectly good companies start falling apart because the people who own them and the people who finance them try to leverage them and put in and extract debt and rip up the companies and try and financially engineer them so that they could extract value for themselves, but not for their customers, not for their suppliers, not for their stakeholders, not for their shareholders. I mean, it's a total disaster. So everything, when I see Muslim business owners, I need to be careful here because some of us here are business owners, and I'm sure we all at some point have been, touched by riba. And sometimes we've had to fund our businesses using riba-based loans. And I've noticed that I work I run a financial services business that finances mid-sized international companies. And something I've noticed is that when we choose to work with a client, we often notice that those clients who have left riba behind, who have forsworn riba, end up having a lot more barakah in their lives. I'm not sure that I can quantify this. I'm not sure I know how to set out a scientific study of this. But having done this for 3+ decades, I see that when people leave riba behind, naturally they have barakah in their family relationships, in their business, in their health, in their daily lives. And as I say, I can't explain it scientifically, but we know that it's from Allah, right? So this I find very fascinating that Allah has told us that riba is haram and trade is halal, and we've ignored it. And our Friday khutbahs will not talk about it. We're embarrassed to talk about it, even though it's one of the most heinous sins. So that's just a sort of, I guess, an intro to riba. I think if you follow some people on LinkedIn, there's a bit of a what do you want to call it? A LinkedIn bro community. It's bros, by the way. It's definitely not sisters doing this. And there's a sort of group of non-finance specialists who are not trained in fiqh, who are talking about, riba's not interest. Riba's usury, it's something else. Riba is the modern definition, the original definition of riba doesn't fit the situation today. That's absolute nonsense. Because riba, does anyone know the root of the word riba in Arabic? Do we know what the word riba actually means? It means excess or surplus. So 1 penny on £1 million is still riba. And there's this argument that I hear amongst people, again, who are not qualified to have this discussion, saying, a little bit of interest is fine. It's a bit like saying a little bit of alcohol is fine. I mean, either it is or it isn't. You can't be half pregnant, right? It's interest or it isn't interest. It's riba or it isn't riba. So the argument they're trying to use is, inflation is now at 3, 4, 5%. So any interest up to 3, 4, 5% is absolutely fine. Because all you're doing is you're matching what inflation is taking away from you. But that's not what Allah's told us. He's made it very clear that any excess, riba, excess, surplus, any excess, 1 penny on £1 million is still riba. So this is an argument that I don't buy. And it's a very modern sort of trendy one which is not based on fiqh. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to give you a brief history lesson because I think it's quite helpful to set into context how we got to where we are in Islamic finance. I told you earlier that Prophet ﷺ was a mudarib, and this is the first form of Islamic finance. So the arrangement that he has with his investor, the Rab al-Mal, is called a mudaraba, means investment management arrangement. I'm going to ask you a question. How many Islamic banks in the world use mudaraba in a prophetic way? Anyone know how many?
0.
Any other takers?
I think it's 4 or 5, but then they're governed by, again, the $1 billion, the panel that sits. But then who picks out that panel at the end of the day? Like, where do they come from? Like,
Yeah, that's the question we're going to come on to on the next slide, actually.
the thing is, they sit on so many panels. How
Yeah.
do they establish where they sit in terms of their position?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a selling. I don't know if they sell to the consumer at the end of the day to see if they can kind of fit a profile for Muslims at the end of the day.
Yeah. So we're gonna answer that question, but I'm interested in the 0 here. Any other takers? How many Islamic banks in the world use mudaraba, this original Islamic finance relationship? Anyone else? Come on, nobody here wants to proffer. It is 0. It is 0. But what this brother has said behind you is there are panels of scholars who have ratified, who have signed off on so-called mudaraba structures. So what I often say when I say this online, and I get people coming back, usually Islamic bankers coming back to me saying, this brother's talking absolute nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's obviously never worked in the industry. Because I work in an Islamic bank and we use mudaraba. And I'm like, sorry, is that a prophetic version of mudaraba, or is that some BS version that you made up and got a stamp of approval on? Because the way that the Islamic banks work, and we're going to spend some time talking about this in later sessions, is they reverse engineer, they replicate everything the conventional industry does. So if the conventional industry is using debt-like products with interest-based transactions, then all the traditional Islamic financial industry does is try to replicate that structure economically and risk-wise. So even though they claim that they're using mudaraba, they're not using it in the prophetic sense, right? Guys, if you don't have any chairs, then would the ladies mind if we take a couple of chairs to the back? Is that okay? Let me just take these. Just grab a couple of these. I think you need one more. Take that one. Okay, so, and if anyone else turns up, then we'll see if we can grab some more from hall 3. Yeah, so the answer is 0. There are no Islamic banks in the world that actually use this prophetic relationship with their investors. They claim that depositors put money into the deposit and then they will manage it as a mudarib, as a manager. And then this pool of money will be, and they'll put it in, some investment here and some investment there, and then they'll pool the profits and they'll give some profits back to you. This is garbage. That's not what they do. And I know this because I'm an insider. So again, I come back to that original point I made right at the start. We get a lot of criticism of the Islamic finance industry. And a lot of that criticism comes from lay people who don't necessarily know what happens on the inside and don't necessarily have the fiqh background, but feel that something is wrong. So they're very polemic in the way that they say, it must be haram. I heard this guy on YouTube and he said it was haram, so it must be haram. But actually what I'm telling you is that I've done this for 30 plus years, and I'm telling you that when they claim they use this prophetic form of Islamic finance called mudaraba, they are not. They're replicating what conventional banks do. So the history of this is that in 1963, an experiment took place in Egypt, a town called Mit Ghamr, which is about 80 kilometers from Cairo, and a famous economist called Ahmed al-Nagar, he set up an experimental, I'm going to use the word bank very loosely. It's more a sort of finance house, investment house. And he decided, let's take in deposits from local people, and we will use those deposits in local industries. So whatever, local factories and so on. And then we will share the profits that are made from these local industries. Pure mudaraba, going back to this prophetic arrangement of mudaraba. So this experiment, the Midghamar experiment, was rolled out across, I think, 8 institutions in Egypt, and they essentially became social savings banks, a bit like mutual cooperatives, which was a nice experiment. Unfortunately, by the time the industry caught on in 1975, and you get the large commercial wholesale banks coming onto the scene. So this is the creation of the first Islamic bank, DIB, Dubai Islamic Bank in 1975. And at the same time, they created the first, what's called a multilateral institution. I don't know if you know what that means, but things like the World Bank and the IMF, these are multilaterals. And the IDB, the Islamic Development Bank, which is a bank set up to develop the Islamic world, so make loans to build, roads and railways and hospitals and schools and stuff. And these 2 institutions were formed in 1975. Now, of course, they realized that in order to make this commercially viable and acceptable to the world around them, you had to make it look and feel like a bank. And what is a bank? A bank is an institution that takes in deposits and makes loans. And then there's something that very few people seem to know about. A bank's real business is not lending, it's actually money creation. 97% of all money in circulation in the British economy is actually created from nothing, called ex nihilo, from nothing, by the banks, whenever a bank makes a loan. So when you deposit your £100 in HSBC or Barclays, what do you think happens to that £100? Does anyone have an idea what happens to it?
I think the rule is, and I could be wrong, I think they can take 90% of that deposit and then go and lend it and then create money. So I think that's my understanding.
I think just continuing with that, so they take some of your money and they lend it to 5 different people.
Yeah.
So that's how it happens. So if I deposit 100 and 5 people in any house, a portion of, all of that would be different.
Yeah.
Everyone will get like 90, 90, 90 or
Yeah.
80, 80, whatever.
Yeah.
Don't they get money from the Bank of England depending on how much deposits they hold?
Okay.
And it's like, I don't know, 4 times or 5 times the amount they hold or something.
Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else? Come on. Nobody on this side is saying anything. Sana, you say something now. You know the answer. I know you do.
There's nothing to do with LIBOR rate or anything like that.
It isn't, but LIBOR is the interest rate that they use. But we will come on to that, actually. Yes, please.
Yeah, in terms of percentages, is it not really dependent on the Bank of England? Well, I think it's the PRA who sets the actual
Yes.
reserve rate.
Yeah. Okay. We got some smart cookies here who've done their research. So actually, the answer is none of what you guys have said. The answer I'm looking for is, what do they do with that £100 of yours that goes into a deposit? Nothing. They do nothing with it. It sits there. What they actually do is they use that nothing sitting in there, which they call a reserve, to be able to lend much more than that £100. So in this country and in the US, there's not even what's called a fractional reserve ratio. It's not even a number that is set by the PRA, which the young man at the back was talking about. PRA is the regulator in this country. There's not even a number set by the regulator that says you're allowed to lend this much. You can lend as much as you want. So if you have £100 sitting in there, you could lend £10,000. Where did the extra £9,900 come from? The answer was it was created ex nihilo, from nothing. Now, if a Martian landed on planet Earth and you told him how banking works, and you said, okay, Martian, you give me £100, put it in the bank, that bank is now going to lend £1,000 or £10,000 to some venture. Whether it's good or bad almost doesn't matter, because they just need to lend. Why? Because it allows them to create money. And when they create money, they can charge interest on money. So 97% of all money circulating in the British economy, and also in other economies around the world, is created by private sector banks in the act of lending. 2 minutes, okay. Cool, okay. So a Martian would say, this is fraud. How can you possibly create money? If you and I did that, we sat in our bedroom at home printing money out of a printer, we go to jail, rightly, because it's fraud, creating money from nothing. But banks are allowed to do this legally. And the reason why is because in the 16th century, I'm a bit caught, have I got 2 minutes? Yeah. In the 16th century, the goldsmith would store gold in his vault. And you'd go to the goldsmith and you say, I'm going to give you a bag of gold, it weighs 5 pounds. Put it in your vault. Give me a piece of paper to say that you're holding 5 pounds of my gold. So he gives you a piece of paper. It says, I owe you 5 pounds of gold. And then you walk around in the community, and it turns out everybody knows that this goldsmith is a upstanding chap who's got a good credit rating and he's trustworthy. So this piece of paper in my hand is now worth something. I can pass it around in the community as a banknote and say, oh, look, I've got 5 pounds of gold in there. But if I give you this, you now own that 5 pounds of gold. So over time, the goldsmith realizes that these pieces of paper are circulating in the community. And he realizes, I can give out more pieces of paper than actually exist as gold in my vaults. So I now have a fractional reserve. I can have 100 bags of gold in my vault, but I can give out 1,000 pieces of paper. At some point, the government realizes and sets up the Bank of England and says, okay, we now need to regulate this. You're allowed to have this many bags of gold as your fractional reserve, and this much is allowed to be lent out as banknotes in the marketplace. And that's how money was created originally. So this is the fraud that takes place in what's called fractional reserve banking. There is nothing Islamic about that, because that's money creation ex nihilo, from nothing. And yet, that is what Islamic banks do. I'm going to pause there so it gives you a chance to, and if you'd like, guys, there's some water at the back, some cups at the back as well if you're feeling thirsty. Okay, so let me finish this slide talking about the modern Islamic finance era. So we talked about this concept of true Islamic finance going back to its roots. Then we talked about the first wholesale and multilateral commercial banks in 1975. The Malaysians came along in the 1980s and they started to ramp it up a bit and started to look at more complex financial products. Then, actually I want to talk about that one a little bit later. Yeah. Then we had the first major retail bank, global retail bank, which was HSBC, who created this brand called HSBC Amana, which I don't know if some of you might remember it. That was the first time that Islamic finance went global. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the man who made that happen, a guy called Iqbal Khan. In the early 2000s, I was with Deutsche Bank, and this is something that I'm going to talk about in a little more detail. But what happened in the early 2000s is Deutsche Bank essentially completely reinvented the industry. So we had a sort of Islamic finance 1.0 around here. We had it 2.0 around here. And I think what's happening right now, which is something I'm going to talk about towards the end, is an Islamic finance 3.0. The thing to bear in mind throughout all of this is everything from this point onwards has been reverse engineering. Everything that we've seen of Islamic banks that are regulated by the same central banks that regulate normal banks, traditional, conventional banks, they follow the same rules. So Islamic banks today are all fractional reserve institutions. That means when you deposit your money with Al Rayyan Bank or Gatehouse in this country, or DIB in Dubai, or Al Rajhi in Saudi, or wherever, you are still depositing your money as a fractional reserve, and the bank still has the right to create money ex nihilo, from nothing. So now you have to ask yourself the question, wait, this is a type of fraud by definition. Technically, it's a fraud because you've created money from nothing. How is that Islamic? How can scholars, the Sharia boards that you were talking about, how can they sign off on this? And the answer is because, frankly, they think they have no alternative. They don't see an alternative that actually works on a true mudaraba basis. The rules around how banks are allowed to create money through loans, how much they need to hold in reserves, what they're allowed to do with those reserves, what they're allowed to do with the different parts of their business. All of these regulatory things are essentially the same whether you are a conventional bank or whether you are an Islamic bank. Which means that when we put our money with an Islamic bank, they're still allowed to create money from nothing. They just call it wakala, istisna, murabaha. They give it these names that I'm sure we don't know what they mean, but they've now been sanctioned and sanctified as Sharia compliant contracts based on fiqh al-mu'amalat, and you get your rubber stamp. So now the scholars have said, yeah, it's fine, it's halal, because all of the contracts that are used to buy your house or finance your car or to deposit your money in a term deposit, they're all based on mudaraba, musharaka, wakala, istisna, salam, etc. So that makes them Sharia compliant, ignoring the fact that the fundamental basis on which Islamic banks operate is reverse engineering, the creation of debt and debt-like services, hence part of the whole financialization system. Okay, so I'm now going to give you a little bit of I guess this is a biography. Let's see where I am. Yeah. Okay. So you remember I mentioned in 1996 HSBC came on the scene. So there was a gentleman called Iqbal Khan who was appointed as CEO of HSBC Amana, which was the Islamic brand of HSBC. And I happened to get invited to a little sort of evening soiree in the city. I was a young investment banker at the time. My field was project finance, which is the financing of infrastructure, roads, railways, and so on. And I got invited to this little thing happening at HSBC, and Iqbal Khan was there. And the evening was meant to be a sort of sit-down, young Muslims in the city, and come and meet me. Let's kind of network together. Let's know each other. I want you to meet somebody, and that somebody happened to be an individual called Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi. And Nizam Yaqubi is one of the world's biggest scholars. And you were mentioning earlier how some scholars sit on multiple boards. He's a guy who sits on like 60 boards. So that's a problem in itself, right? That's a major conflict throughout the industry. So very interesting evening. We thought it was to kind of network and see what's going on. But actually, it was a talent search. It was a chance for, you want to rescue? It was a chance for Iqbal Khan to go talent spotting and find out who in the city had what skills and what they could do for HSBC Amana. Very clever guy, very charismatic guy, knew how to draw people to him, very good people person. And he knew that he needed all the skill sets, technical, marketing, finance, legal, all in one place to be able to create this global brand called HSBC Amana. And having a chance to meet one of the world's most famous scholars, Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi, was the sort of the attraction, the draw for us, that we could come and meet him and find out what's going on. So this was the start of the sort of the talent search for HSBC Amana. And of course, the interesting thing was this was happening in the city of London. This wasn't happening in Saudi Arabia or Dubai or Malaysia. This was happening in London. And it was a chance to assemble young Muslim, practicing, ideologically driven, so they had an alignment of culture and values and faith, and importantly, Western educated. And there's quite a big difference in the styles of Western educated Muslims, and I've got to be careful, I've got to choose my words carefully. I've often in my career had to deal with the gatekeepers to the scholars. That's what they call Sharia coordination departments. So when you're a banker and you're trying to get a product signed off, you go to these departments and you say, okay, here's a product and here's the characteristics of this product and we need the scholar to approve it. Please get it approved. So often what these Sharia coordination departments do is they say, doctor says no. That's it. Doctor says no. And you're like, okay, but how can we make this work? I don't know, doctor says no. And what ended up happening was we would end up going directly to the scholars and having this relationship with them and saying, respectfully, sir, you know, I know that in fiqh we can't do this, this, and this, but we are allowed to do this. So maybe we could structure it in such a way that we can make it work through this. And the scholars like this new relationship. So what happened in 2001 was I was working for Deutsche Bank, and I got approached by a senior manager in Deutsche Bank who said, I'd like you to go to Dubai and set up an office in Dubai and start to what we call originate all of our corporate finance business. That means look for new deals, mergers and acquisitions, project finance, other investment banking services. And at a pretty young age, I was being asked to go and set up on my own in a new frontier. The Dubai government had just announced something called DIFC, which stands for Dubai International Financial Centre. And it was their version of the square mile in the City of London. Everything in one place, in one big real estate project. All the investment banks, the lawyers, the accountants, the administrators, all together. And the advantage that we have in London is that we are literally in the square mile. So we can walk across the road and meet the guy from the other bank or negotiate with somebody or bring the lawyers in or the accountants or the other advisors. We're all in one place. So Dubai was trying to create its own thing. So when I arrived, a lot of clients immediately said to us, hey, it's great that you're here, Deutsche Bank, but can you do these deals on a Sharia compliant basis? And because we're bankers and we lie for a living, we said, yeah, sure, we know how to do that. But we didn't. So we hired somebody, and he was called Sheikh Hussein Hamid Hassan. And he was the architect of Deutsche Bank's Islamic finance expansion. And some people refer to him as the grandfather of the Islamic finance industry. So what I didn't realize was at the time, a lot of similar conversations were happening throughout the city. And a lot of the big investment banks and what they call magic circle law firms were asking young Muslims to relocate to the Middle East because they sensed that something was happening. And then something did happen, and it was called 9/11. And I just arrived in Dubai 2 days earlier. So I'm sitting in a service department with my boxes still unpacked in front of me. And my wife called me, and she said, switch on the TV. I said, oh, wow, what's happened? So I switch it on, and there's these planes flying into World Trade Center. And everything changed from that point onwards. Because all of a sudden, lots of Arab accounts, sheikhs and emirs who hold ultra-high net worth holdings with Swiss banks and American banks, their accounts were being super scrutinized. And obviously, the vast majority of this completely clean. But because of this extra scrutiny, a lot of the Arab money, the Gulf money in the West, started to get repatriated back to the Gulf. So what happens? Naturally, all the stocks and all the real estate prices go up. All this money is being repatriated. New developments start happening. Dubai government starts building its own square mile called the DIFC. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So now clients are coming to us and saying, can you do these deals on a Sharia compliant basis? And we're saying, geez, who do we hire for this? Let's get the world's top scholar. So we brought him in, the grandfather of the Islamic finance industry, Sheikh Hussein Hamid Hassan. Okay, so this is not the grandfather of the Islamic finance industry. This is the godfather. And we actually had a guy that we called the godfather of the Middle East. He was a guy called Yassin Bohara. And he was a very senior person in the bank. So his job was to place us in the Middle East and to oversee what we were doing. And he once called me into his office in London. And he said, he's a French Algerian, by the way. Is it low-key racist of me to use a French Algerian accent? I need to ask my daughter these things because she's always telling me. Please.
As a Tunisian, no, it's not.
Okay, good. So he says, I want you to create the Islamic Big Mac. The Islamic Big Mac. And I said, well, what does that mean? He says, I want you to think about what the Big Mac is. It's a product whose quality is the same around the world. So you could walk into a McDonald's and buy a Big Mac in Moscow and buy it in Karachi and buy it in New York, and essentially it's the same product made to the same quality standards. That's a pretty crappy quality. Obviously, it's junk food. We don't like it, and it's on the BDS list as well, and it's haram. But apart from these things, it has the same quality throughout the world. And what he was saying was, why don't we in the Islamic finance industry have an Islamic finance product that is universally accepted throughout the world and is offered to everybody at the same quality standards and roughly the same price and competitiveness and so on? So he wanted us to, this godfather of the Middle East, he wanted us to create this Islamic Big Mac in the financial product space. And that's what we did. And because he was a powerful sponsor, we were able to sit away in a dungeon somewhere in Deutsche Bank and create this thing. We were what I call a skunk works team. Has anyone heard this term, skunk works? No, I'll explain. So typically in a large industrial company, which is manufacturing, I don't know, let's say they're a car manufacturer and they make ordinary family cars. Sometimes you'll have a skunk works team, and maybe they're part of the motorsport department, and they go away and sit in a shed somewhere away from the main building and away from their bosses who can't see what they're doing. And they say, we're going to create a 600 horsepower race car. I know that we build family hatchbacks over there, but we've got the skills to come and do this thing over here. And as long as nobody knows about it, when we roll this 600 horsepower race car out of the shed and everybody sees it, they'll say, oh my God, we can do this? Let's manufacture this. But to be asked permission to build the 600 horsepower monster, you're not going to get it. So we became a skunkworks team. And on the quiet, we disappeared into our little shed and created these products and then emerged from our shed 2 years later. And none of the market had done it. So Deutsche Bank all of a sudden had 100% market share in this space because we'd invented products that had never been done before. And these words are not going to mean anything to you, but they'll be large, exchangeable, convertible, sukuk, acquisition financing, private equity funds, hedging products, treasury management products, structured investment products. All the things that the Islamic finance industry was not doing up to that point were suddenly being created by Deutsche Bank because of our godfather looking after us. Okay, so let's talk about the billion-dollar scholar. This is Sheikh Hussein Hamid Hassan. So as I said to you, we had this confluence of people in Dubai at the time who had just arrived from London. And they were mostly British Pakistanis, some British Indian, one or two British Bangladeshis, all practicing Muslims, all ideologically aligned. They worked for what I call bulge bracket investment banks, which are the world's top investment banks. Magic Circle law firms, which are the top city London law firms, people like Clifford Chance and Allen Overy. And suddenly, we found ourselves in an expat district of Dubai, and we all attended the same mosque. So this is a happy confluence of lots of factors: proximity, market forces, cultural alignment. We all played football together on Saturday mornings. Suddenly, there's a dozen of the world's top Islamic bankers and lawyers praying together in the same mosque at the same time. So, there's no such thing as luck. This is qadar Allah, right? We're all collected together in one place in order to build this thing. And we did build this thing. We'd just been parachuted in like a SWAT team from London to build Islamic Finance 2.0 in the desert in DIFC. Something that had never been done before. Deutsche Bank was the leader in that. For a couple of years, we had 100% market share because nobody knew how to do the things that we did. But then everybody started catching up. So you had the JP Morgans and the Citibanks and the law firms as well, all learning how to build these new financial products that had never been done before. And essentially, and maybe looking back on it, we didn't realize at the time, but we were replicating the conventional financial services industry. And we were contributing to increased financialization of the world, including the Muslim world. In the beginning, we tried to do things right. So in the beginning, remember when we talked about prophetic economics and I described this mudaraba to you? And the mudaraba is a risk-sharing arrangement. The Rab al-Mal, the investor, and the mudarib, the manager, they're equal partners. This is a healthy relationship, right? When you have a borrower and a lender, you've got an asymmetric relationship. One is the master and one is the servant. When you have a relationship with the bank, that's not a fair relationship. When you give your £100 deposit to the bank, who does that money belong to? The bank. It doesn't belong to you. If you want to withdraw £10,000 to pay your builder, what do? You have to go to the cash teller and say, I'd like to have £10,000. Why do you want £10,000? Give me all these reasons. They look at you up and down, they check your ID. It's my money. Why are you asking me questions? I want to use it for my purpose. But the moment you give your money to the bank, it's not yours anymore. It's an asymmetric relationship with the bank. And it's deliberately designed that way. And now you're going to start to think I'm a lunatic because I'm going to say this is because the government wants to surveil you. I probably have a bit more of a sympathetic audience here when I say things like that, but I will certainly be very careful saying that in an industry conference, because then you're genuinely a lunatic, right? But I think some of you will agree here that we as a community are under surveillance. So why do I want my activities being surveilled further? Why do I want to give my money to a bank, for example? So these are different questions which we'll address later, and I'm really going off on a tangent now. So here we are, we've arrived in Dubai, we've been parachuted in. For a couple of years, we got 100% market share. We've got the world's most powerful scholar, Sheikh Hussein Hamid Hassan, who was an Egyptian lawyer, a comparative lawyer. He wrote the constitution for Egypt, by the way. He was famous worldwide, extremely intelligent, extremely capable. And you remember I talked to you about these Shariah coordination departments, the gatekeepers to the scholars? So they were the guys who would say, doctor says no. But you can pick him up on the speed dial and say, Sheikh, I got this issue. And he had never previously had this kind of relationship, a dynamic relationship with investment bankers before. It was respectful, but it pushed back. It said, respectfully, sir, I disagree. And here's why I disagree. He'd never had that relationship before with his Sharia coordination department, which was very much, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. Whereas with us, it was, hey, we're trying to create a new industry here, help us out. Let's find a way to fix these problems. And in those early days, we did try to reflect prophetic economics. We did try to do those risk-sharing structures like Mudaraba. And he did approve them. But over time, they got diluted. Over time, the banks, the credit departments, the compliance departments, the traders, the legal departments, they all wanted this to look and feel like a loan with interest. So we might have started that way, but we ended up with Islamic bonds, which are called sukuk, looking like conventional bonds. And so when an Islamic banker comes to you, and we will talk about this in subsequent weeks, an Islamic banker comes to you and he says, oh, but sukuk are different, Islamic bonds are different, they're not like normal bonds, there's no interest, there's a real asset behind it, there's a real trade behind it, you're sharing in the risks of that trade. This is absolute garbage. Nothing of the sort happens. And if you actually examine the contracts in great legal detail, you would see the risk profile of an Islamic bond is exactly the same as a conventional bond. And the economics are exactly the same as a conventional bond. So if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. Let's not pretend otherwise. Which is why, again, what you're getting from me is a minority view, because most of the Islamic finance industry will say, hey, the scholars have signed off on it, so it's fine. But that's not how I live. And when I see what scholars do with, for example, cryptocurrencies, they're about 10 years behind. Almost every fatwa you see about cryptocurrencies from ulama is based on information from about 10 years ago. So I've stopped listening to them. Because if we listen to I've got to be really careful what I say here now. There are scholars who are qualified in this area, in areas of fiqh al-mu'amalat and modern finance and economics. There is a small handful. But your average community scholar, social media personality, they're not going to be well versed in this field, neither technically nor in terms of fiqh al-mu'amalat. And it's a bit disturbing to me when they make these pronouncements, because I believe they're causing harm to the ummah when they do this. So when they say, Wallahi, Bitcoin is haram, and then they give you your reasons, and you realize those reasons are based on total misinformation, it really makes me question everything else that they do. That really concerns me. I've really gone off on a tangent on this one, so I'm going to move on. Okay, what time is it? Yeah. So as I said, we tried to start in a good way to start with, and over time it got abused. We created a black box at Deutsche Bank. It was a particular technique to replicate the returns of almost any financial instrument. You could think of the most haram type of financial instrument you can. I don't know, some derivative based on pork belly futures, whatever. You could literally replicate the return of that financial instrument using an apparently halal black box. Now, the details are the details, and we're not going to go into that. But it caused a major spat in the industry. This was our Manhattan Project. Does anyone know what the Manhattan Project was? You do know, and you're refusing to. Yeah. Yes. So World War II, the Allies have to create the atomic bomb before Hitler. They assemble in the desert in Los Alamos, and this project is to try and create this atomic bomb. This was our own Manhattan Project. This black box that we created was a type of method or technology that allowed us to replicate the return of any financial instrument, which is crazy when you think about it. We did intend that it was to be used for halal underlyings, stocks that were halal, for example. Unfortunately, the generic fatwa that we had allowed the salespeople, and the sales culture of investment banks is rapacious, the sales culture meant that they abused that fatwa, and they replicated the return from all sorts of crazy hedge funds with a halal stamp on it and sold it. So we created quite a problem, and there was a major spat in the industry between our own Sheikh Hussein Hamid Hassan and another famous scholar called Sheikh Yusuf de Lorenzo, and he described it as the doomsday fatwa. He said that this was a question of letter versus spirit of the law. So you may be following the letter of the law and have all these contracts that are in accordance with fiqh al-mu'amalat. But what is the overall impact of this? What are you doing? Are you contributing to the worst excesses of financialization, of a proliferation of debt and debt-based services and riba-like transactions, even though you call them something else? Or are you genuinely doing something different, something alternative, something based on prophetic economics, on trade, not riba, on mudaraba, not murabaha, and we will discuss. Let me talk a little bit about this thing called murabaha, by the way. There's an analogy with something used in the Middle Ages by Christian financiers. Did you know the church banned usury? So there's the famous passage in the Bible of Jesus alayhi salam overturning the tables of the money lenders or the money changers. So he goes into the temple of Herod and he throws over these tables, and he gets a whip and he whips them out of the temple, which is, I believe, in the Bible the only time that Jesus is documented committing a violent act against the bankers, right? The violence happens against the bankers. So the church banned usury, and by usury I mean interest. I think people have this in their head. They have usury is something that is excessive interest. In Islam, it's one and the same thing. I can only presume that in Christianity it was, because the church would not allow lending at interest. So what did financiers do in the Middle Ages? They created 3 contracts side by side, each of which was not a loan with interest. They were 3 separate things doing 3 different things. And when you combined them, they ended up effectively being a loan with interest. And the church would have looked at this and said, well, individually they are church compliant, or whatever the equivalent term is, and there's no usury here. So they overlooked it. And this thing was called contractum trineus, 3 contracts in one. So contractum trineus was the way of the financiers circumventing religious laws to create loans with interest. We have our own version of this today. And by the way, what happened was, Christianity completely forgot that, or at least organized Christianity completely forgot that usury was banned, and now usury is prevalent throughout the world. Even the Vatican in 1917 started to invest in interest-bearing bonds. So by that point, you've lost the game, right? I hope that will never happen to us, inshallah. I hope that we hold fast to the rope of Allah. Our own version of contractum trineus is called commodity murabaha. You would be amazed how many Islamic banks and fintech firms are using this basic structure called commodity murabaha to replicate the terms of a loan with interest. Whenever I see commodity murabaha, I move on. I know sometimes it's used in the industry because there are external factors like tax legislation, for example, that forces them down that road, that they have to use that structure to replicate an investment return. I understand that, but personally, I won't touch it. It's dubious as far as I'm concerned, because we've created our own version of contractum trineus. We use this particular contractual structure to replicate the economics of a loan with interest and, importantly, the risk profile of a loan with interest. That's an important point. And as a result, we've basically made a mockery of Islamic finance. There's almost no Islamic finance in the world that is true risk sharing, where the Rab al-Mal and the Mudarib are sharing risk and the profits or losses of a venture. We're not allowed to guarantee our capital. We're not allowed to. We're supposed to put it at risk. It's a healthy economy. It's a healthy society that does due diligence on each other. Are you trustworthy? Do you have a good technical skill set? Do you understand this industry? Are you doing something that you've managed the risks properly? Yeah, I've done my due diligence on you. I accept that you're a good partner to have. Now let's go into business. That's not what banks do. They tell you that they do, but they don't. They say that they do risk analysis, but believe me, when they raise $1 billion bond, all they do is they look at a balance sheet and say, yeah, I'll give it a AA rating. That'll do. Here's some money. Give me some money back with interest. I don't really care what happens in between. I call it the Goodfellas model, but I can't explain to you what that means because I have to use a swear word and I can't do that here. Yeah, so yeah, I think I'm going to try and wrap up at this point and take some questions for you. But just want to reiterate that next week we are going to do halal finance, savings and investment. So we're going to talk about things like Islamic mortgages, how to finance your home in a halal way, our Islamic banks true to prophetic ideals, introducing stocks, bonds, sukuk, funds, exchange traded funds, derivatives, investing your savings in a halal way, investing in property, what makes a financial instrument Sharia compliant, and taking a loan halal or haram. So we have a few minutes now if anyone has any questions in relation to the topic today. But otherwise, I mean, I'm happy to entertain some questions around mortgages and halal savings and investment if that's something that helps structure the discussion for next week. So if anyone has any, please.
I apologize. I can't make next week, only next week, and probably the most interesting topic, but I'm out of the country, so I'm going to definitely watch the recording. But I think one question I have, and I know a few others have asked, is just around stocks and shares and Sharia compliance according to the Halafi standards and the basically financial ratios.
Yeah.
How, I don't know, how do you manage it now that a lot of those, for instance, Microsoft is probably the biggest holder in a lot of these Sharia compliant ETFs. For those of us that aren't experts and can't invest in individual companies, but want to, grow your money, how do you think about that? And I understand that's something that...
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that. Actually, I do have a blog online. So if you look at my LinkedIn profile, which is in the pack that I sent, there's one article called Investing My Savings in a Halal Way. And I mentioned this topic in there. So the brother here is talking about, there's an organization in the Islamic finance world called AOFI. AOFI stands for Auditing and Accounting Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. And basically, it's a standard setting body. So it says, these are the standards for what you're allowed to invest in and not allowed to invest in. And it's a huge book full of regulations. And the gentleman here is asking, how do we know when we're investing in a fund or a stock that it meets these criteria? And one of the things I talk about in my blog is, there are some exchange traded funds, which are like a stock on a stock exchange that contains a basket of shares. So you can buy an ETF for semiconductors and then have a basket of semiconductor stocks in there. Or you can buy an ETF on renewable energy, for example. And what I often do is when I'm looking at these sectors and I say, I quite like renewable energy, how do I invest in that in a halal way? I look at the top 10 holdings in that fund. And I look at the balance sheet. This is a very boring and laborious way to do it, and probably AI can speed it up, actually. I look at the balance sheets of each of those companies. This is terrible, by the way. We shouldn't have to do this. I can do this because I have the financial background to be able to do it. But we don't have enough companies that serve us to do this for us. And I'll talk about some of those companies that do that. Wahid is one of them, by the way. Then I look at those top 10 holdings and I say, what are your leverage ratios? How much debt do you have on the balance sheet, interest-paying debt? So the scholars have said, historically, that there are broadly 3 financial filters that you apply to stocks to determine whether they are compliant or non-compliant. And very broadly, one of those filters, for example, is that you must have less than a third of your balance sheet should be debt, your debt to capital market ratio. Market capitalization ratio. It's pretty arbitrary. And these rules were set up so that they would not severely disadvantage or hurt Muslims, right? You could argue that the only correct standard is 0 interest-bearing debt. I mean, that's one that I respect. But unfortunately, you can't build a portfolio, a balanced portfolio, if you only follow that criteria. There aren't enough companies in the world that have 0 debt. We are all tainted by riba in some way. The question is, how much can we remove it from our lives? So the scholars determined, based on various ijtihad, that they would allow up to 1/3 of the balance sheet to be interest-bearing debt. Similarly, they allowed up to 5% of the business, of the trading activities of the business, to be non-compliant, as long as that percentage was removed, was purified from the dividend stream. So they had some, checks and balances. Those criteria are very old now. They're at least 20, 25 years old by now. So I think it's time to update them. The problem is that in the Muslim world, we do not have what's called a deep and liquid market. That means we don't have big companies. We don't have the Muslim Google or the Muslim Nvidia or the Muslim CNN. Well, we have Al Jazeera, I guess. But we have very few major world companies with deep and liquid markets, financial markets. And it's the job of people like me, for example, to try and create that alternative market. Because what I see happening up until now is that our Islamic finance industry has merely tried to replicate what the conventional industry does. And when it does that, it doesn't move the game on, right? It doesn't really change anything fundamental. We're still doing fractional reserve banking. We're still creating money ex nihilo from nothing. We're still creating this Manhattan Project, the black box, that caused such a controversy. We're not actually creating an alternative economic system based on prophetic ideals like mudaraba, the first form of Islamic finance. We don't do that. So these organizations like AOFI, I respect what they do, but in some ways, I've reached that stage in my life and my career where I think I might be dead tomorrow. So I better run at 100 miles an hour today and try and fix this thing and create something completely alternative. And then qadar Allah. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But at least somebody tried. So there are some people in the industry who are doing this. One thing I find interesting is Wahid, the robo-advisory platform. They have recently introduced an ETF, an exchange-traded fund, this stock that you buy on an exchange, which is a basket of lots of underlying stocks. So it's thematic. You invest in a particular theme. And their theme is ethical companies. And they have screened out, not just using the AOFI filters, which is this 33% leverage ratio and 5% haram income ratio and all the rest of it, but almost more importantly, they've screened out those bad faith actors, Palantir, for example, who build killer machines and killer intelligence to murder our people around the world, or drone manufacturers, or companies with ties to an entity that shall not be named, that steals land and murders people. And I think that's fantastic, because that's creating a true alternative economic system. We're not now looking at whatever's already being traded on the NASDAQ or the London Stock Exchange and saying, yeah, I'll have that ETF, I'll have that ETF, I'll have that one. No, we're creating our own thing now. And that's what we need to do. We need to skill up. We need to have ihsan. We don't have ihsan as a community, because on Friday I drove through here coming out of Jummah, and a guy just decided to double park and block 2 cars in. So I wound my window down and I said to him, bro, you can't park there. What are you doing? These guys can't get out. He says, I'm going to come back straight after. I said, no, you won't. I know. You're going to be in there for ages, and these poor guys won't be able to get out, and you're causing harm to people on the day of Jummah. And he says, oh, don't worry, I'll be back straight. I say, you're not listening to me. You're spoiling your own salah, your own prayer on Jummah by causing distress to your neighbors, to other people. And he said to me, I can't believe he said this. I said, brother, you went too far there. You went too far, telling me that I'm spoiling my own prayer. I mean, what can you do with our community who don't have a commitment to ihsan? Sorry, I'm really going off on a tangent here. But I'm saying we as a community, we don't think to ourselves, I'm just going to be the best that I can in whatever field that I am, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in the law, whether it's in financial services, whether it's I'm a teacher, whether I'm a plumber, whether I'm a carpenter, whatever. We don't have a sense of ihsan in our community. Like, I'm going to be the best that it's possible to be, right? Which starts with not double parking on the day of Jummah and thinking that's okay, Anyway, sorry, that's another rant. Any more questions for today, please?
I have an observation and I have a question. What you said about barakah really resonates. So, we obviously live in a secular country. We don't have a choice in some things, and we have to kind of operate in this economy. But a few years ago, I decided to get my financial advisor to look at my pension fund and try and make some changes, because I didn't even know where to start.
Yeah.
He had a look at the market, said there are not enough Sharia compliant funds.
This is an IFA, I presume. Yeah.
Not enough Sharia compliant funds. So we just did something bespoke, which is start with what was available and then look at what was ethical.
Yeah.
And then cobble something together. But one thing he said to me, which I remembered from what you were saying, is that if you have nothing in cash, which generates interest, then that's a real risk for your pension fund. But we took that risk, took that risk. Yeah. And he said, look, I have to tell you that, your funds are going to suffer as a result, and it's going to,
So you had some of it held in cash in that case?
Previously.
Yes.
So we moved everything out of cash
and
put it into ethical/Sharia.
Yeah.
And what happened?
And that was equities, that was shares, was it?
Yeah. So it's now in a form that we think is more aligned.
Yeah.
And contrary to his kind of concern and contrary to what was anticipated, the fund actually did better against market conditions, and it really surprised him. But it didn't surprise me, because I was like, I'm prepared to take that risk because I've got to sweat out my conscience.
Alhamdulillah.
But the question I had for you was that you said on your profile that you manage a fund called Riba. So could you tell us a bit about that? Yeah,
it's not a fund as such, and it's in some ways it's less relevant to what I would refer to as a retail audience, because the product that I manufacture is for professional investors and institutions. And the reason for that is because that's what the regulator makes me do. Because the regulator says you are manufacturing what's called a sophisticated product, which is a technical term in finance. And a sophisticated product means you can only sell it to accredited professional qualified investors. But basically what we do is, I saw that what the Islamic banks have very much failed to do is to finance business. So you could go to Al Rayyan or Gatehouse in this country. Al Rayyan no longer offer mortgages, I think, for retail customers, which is a real betrayal of the community, by the way. I think Gatehouse do. But they have, to my knowledge, never offered small business loans. Now, I'm using the word loan. What I really mean is the word financing. small business financing, because it shouldn't be a loan, and it shouldn't look like a loan, and it shouldn't feel like a loan, and it shouldn't make Muslims say, you know, I went to my Islamic bank and I got this product from them, but it felt like they just crossed out the word interest and wrote the word profit, and they charged me more for it. I don't really see what's ethical about that. So, as you can tell, I'm not a fan. I used to be a big champion of the Islamic banking industry. I used to be an Islamic banker, but 10 years ago, I decided I could just no longer keep up this facade. And what I wanted to do was to create a completely alternative economic ecosystem where we cater for ourselves, right? So I got approached by, I'm kind of going a bit random and off topic now. I got approached by the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of a good, strong, mid-sized international agribusiness. And it happened to be that one of the big product lines that they did was Brazil nuts. That was one of their big products. They're one of the world's biggest distributors. But the thing about mid-sized businesses is they're often owner-managed. It's not listed on a stock exchange somewhere with 1 million investors, and it's usually owned by 1 or 2 individuals. And so there's only 2 ways that they can raise money for working capital for their needs. Either they go to the banks and they get a bank loan, or they dilute their equity. They raise more money in shares in their company. But if you own the company, why would you want to give away your company just to raise working capital? That doesn't make any sense. Similarly, the owner of this business, who by the way is a British non-Muslim entrepreneur, right? So he has no interest in Islamic, he doesn't know anything about Islamic finance. But his CFO came to me and said, well, what do we do here? The banks are throwing money at us. We're a really good company. I often have this discussion with some business owners who say, you know, I went to the banks, I couldn't get money off them. Do you think Islamic finance will give me money? We're not a charity. We're here to have ihsan, excellence. We look for good, strong companies. Our criteria should be tighter, not looser, right? So this guy came to me and he said, look, we don't want the banks giving us money anymore. It's not flexible. It creates a burden on our balance sheet. We have to give them security and collateral, and we pay interest, and they don't grow with us. They're not flexible. They cut off our lines whenever they feel like it. And we don't want to dilute our equity because the business is owned by an individual. Why should he give his business away to somebody? But we need to finance our activities. And, you know, they collect the raw barikas, the raw materials from which they extract the Brazil nuts, process them in their factories, package them, ship them worldwide. I said, well, that's perfect. That's a real economic activity. That's real trade. Why don't we get the investors to buy the raw materials on their behalf? Now we've bought those raw materials. You take them, you process them, you sell them, and we'll split the profits afterwards in a predetermined ratio, X to Y. And he says, okay, why doesn't everybody do this? Because it's not banking. It's not a master-slave relationship. It's a partnership relationship between the Rab al-Mal and the Mudarib. So now we have a true prophetic relationship between the investor and the investee. And we package this up into a modern, sophisticated capital markets instrument. So it's actually it's a bit like a listed bond on an exchange somewhere, except it's genuinely Sharia compliant. This is going back to the roots of prophetic economics in a modern, sophisticated capital markets package.
And that's acceptable to the regulator here?
Yes, absolutely. So we did this, and then the CFO who came to me, he said, so nobody else is doing this? I said, no. He says, why don't we create a new company around this? So that's what we did. We became co-founders of this company. So now we do this for mid-sized international businesses. Yeah. But there's very few people doing what we do. There's not. I mean, I think people are unwilling to take the risk. I mean, I've known bankers, both in Islamic banks and conventional banks, who've been doing this for decades now. And they always say to me, oh, brother, you know, I feel really bad. I want to move out of this. I really love what you're doing. I wish I could do that. You can. You can. Quit your job today. You have the skills. You got a nice car and a nice house and your kids are going to a nice school. You've achieved what you need to achieve materially. Come on. Stop. They've got golden handcuffs. They don't want to leave. The whole industry is like that, unfortunately. Anyway, any more questions?
Reflecting back on something you said early on, did you say that the original sign-off of, I guess, the products was out of the fact that there was no alternative, or there was no choice? I can't seem to remember.
So over time, scholars have given fatwa on the basis of context. So for example, I think in the 1980s, in the UK and Europe, some scholars allowed Muslims to use normal mortgages because of the doctrine of necessity. So if there is no other product available and you need a roof over your head, they said it's allowed to buy your house using a conventional mortgage. And then over time, new products get introduced and the scholars will change their judgment. So these fatwa are not fixed in time. The scholars will always review what's currently happening and say, okay, you can now you should use the Islamic banks. And then later there'll be other products that come across. So I mean, as much as I am a critic of Islamic banking, I do also say I don't want to create a harm on people by saying, wallahi, you should never use what Islamic banks do, because then what is your alternative? You don't have an alternative and you want a roof over your head. So why would I do that harm on people? I'm not saying don't use Islamic mortgages. I'm saying go into it with your eyes open. There are other providers out there now. So there's one company I really like called FIDA, P-F-I-D-A. They're beautiful brothers. They're brilliant people. They have ihsan, which is really important. They're technically excellent. They're trying to do the right thing. They're value aligned with our community. They're from our community. When you look at the Islamic banks in this country, do you see anyone who looks like us? No. They don't know what we do. They ask for meetings at 1 p.m. on a Friday. I'm like, bro, I'm not going to be around at 1 p.m. on a Friday. So, we're dealing with, our industry is run by the wrong people. It's really that simple.
Then extending that then, when you say run by the wrong people, when we touched, I think the brother mentioned earlier about the Shariah councils and the individuals, the sheikhs who sit on top of them.
Yeah.
And I guess there's also the potential conflict of interest
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of reflect on that, and I think who checks the checker.
Yeah.
And I know obviously we've got Hilfi there as well.
I have to be super careful now. So I will start this by saying I deeply respect the ulama. There are some incredibly capable and able individuals with a lot of integrity. But scholars are not chosen for their rebelliousness. If you are a scholar who says, I don't like the way the Islamic banking industry works, you're not going to sit on any boards, are you? You're not going to work in the industry.
Well, no, and I think thinking about the conflict, then this phrase is used historically, fatwas for sale.
Yeah.
So
fatwa shopping. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So there's the whole linkage you mentioned earlier on. You can when you shake on speed dial and say, actually, don't give me problems, give me solutions.
Yeah.
And you say, how can we navigate
Yeah.
this? And I then think back to I guess the topic of the session, prophetic economics, and I think probably when I sort of maybe misheard you earlier on, thinking about the sign-off, was it due to necessity or there was no choice? And I thought, for me, it's like the sort of original sin, really, in some sense.
So, what I would say was, when we did the Manhattan Project, or our version of it, initially, we were all on the same page. Sheikh Hussein, the bankers, we were all, people like me, we're all ideologically driven. We knew we were doing something really, really important right now. And we were really idealistic. We wanted to do it the right way. And when we created this product, we knew it was a very powerful technology and we wanted it to be used for good. So we wanted to create, for example, treasury management products and hedging products that were good for companies to manage their risks. Completely halal. Unfortunately, because investment banks are investment banks and they're very sales driven, our salespeople had other ideas and the whole thing got corrupted along the way. And even our scholar recognized this. He was super mad. He was really angry about it. And he said, from now on, I want to see every product personally, every single one, not the generic fatwa that I've created around this, not the thing that I've signed off on an overall platform level, but every single product. I even want to see the advertising material for it. That's how far he wanted. So I respect many of these scholars, but unfortunately, they're often chosen for their acquiescence and they don't want to rock the boat. So they end up, essentially approving everything.
So I think when you spoke earlier, so it's the last thing I'll touch on. When you spoke about, I guess, just the moment where the bankers and the lawyers arrived in Dubai, you're praying in the same mosque, playing football.
Yeah.
And I thought at that time, you said you were all on the same page.
Yeah, we were.
And then obviously you answered it, which is effectively, it doesn't work, does it? The banks need,
because we're fighting a system that is much bigger than us. So we could have 12 people in one mosque doing great things, and for a few years they did. But ultimately, the market is massive, and there's nothing way. What you have to do is create these little ecosystems, which is what I'm trying to do with my company right now, where we do something and it gets enough momentum and it's taken up by the market till eventually the big banks sit up and take notice. And what's going on over there? We better get a piece of that, right? But you have to be careful because they might dilute your culture. Yeah, they might copy it. They might do it badly. They might distort it. Sorry, yeah, there's a.
Yeah. So you touched upon something that you can't make money from money. So is FX trading haram no matter?
Yeah, I get asked this question quite a lot. Yeah. So the scholars say that spot trading is allowed. So you're allowed to exchange one currency for another. But any futures trading or any other type of derivative contract of a currency is contrary to the hadith that says gold should be exchanged for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, salt for salt, dates for dates, on a hand-to-hand basis, which means spot prices only. Yeah. I'll take one more question then, unless there's one more from this side. There isn't, so I'll take one more question, then we'll wrap it up.
Last one, going back to Wahid's ethical ETF UKITs. So I was looking at that, the top 10 holdings of UKITs and the top 10 holdings of HLAL, the one they had before. They're pretty much the same.
Oh yeah? Are you talking about the new fund that they've launched?
Yeah, so you
okay.
know how they use the four screening bodies, and the top 10 holdings are making up more than 50% of the ETF. So
yeah.
The bulk of it hasn't really changed. And in the top 10 holdings, you've got Amazon, Google, Microsoft,
yeah.
Meta. And
yeah.
To be honest, they were the biggest concerns in the first place.
Yeah.
And I feel like it just feels like it's different advertising, and the product seems quite.
I mean, I almost feel duty bound to defend them because I think that the sentiment is an important one. Even if the execution is, maybe it's not quite there. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't examined it in the way that you have. But I was really happy when I saw their sentiment, their intention to screen out the worst actors.
Yeah, no, because it sounded great.
Yeah.
Previously, I hadn't used Wahid just because you see how AOFI has the three standards: they're compliant, non-compliant, and questionable.
Yeah.
I tried looking for ETFs that allowed me to filter out questionable, just because I felt more at ease that way.
Yeah.
And so I thought that's what the ethical ETF would bring.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was more to do with things like human rights records and that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, it's a step in the right direction. And we need more of that. And I think we need to encourage it and support it. I think as a community, we do have a tendency to put things down and say, oh, these guys are rubbish, these guys are rubbish. Maybe I'm guilty of that myself, so it's a reminder to me. But I think this is a great step in the right direction. And I was never originally a huge supporter of Wahid, but when I see what they're doing now, I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, I think they started a lot.
Yeah.
That brought a lot of
Yeah.
others as well, so.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add. I mean, in your opinion, for instance, if we have companies like Microsoft that are complicit in, I'm not going to, but complicit in that, and then you're making money on, for instance, Microsoft's on the BDS list as an example. How do you feel about that? I mean, there's almost no options because I agree. I think what Wahid are doing are great. And need more like that. But yeah, and when you look at your pension, you have very, very little options.
Yeah.
But you kind of need your.
So I'm going to give you a wishy-washy answer because I don't think it's easy to answer it.
Yeah.
And that wishy-washy answer is it comes back to this concept of ihsan as a community. We just don't have it.
Yeah.
And we complain about things. And I often have people say to me, you should do this and you should do that. And I'm like, do it yourself. I mean, I work 7 days a week doing what I do. Why don't you go and do it if you really want that to happen? And I think as a community, we say, they should do this and they should do that. And then they write articles about it. I mean, go out there in the world and make it happen. So as a community, I attended something very interesting in Doha in January. It was a gathering of about 100 people who were all senior people in their respective industries. So senior executives in media, in finance, in healthcare. There were different domains. And they all met to discuss soft power, ummatic soft power. How do we as an ummah counter this narrative that's against us today in CNN and BBC? How do we create the Muslim Google and the Muslim Meta and the Muslim Apple? How do we How do we become self-contained and trade amongst each other? Why are we beholden to the US dollar, which is a big subject I want to talk about in future weeks, which will be the week after you come back. So these things are, and I'm sorry, this answer is wishy-washy. If we don't solve the problem of skilling up and becoming excellent at what we do, whether that's a data scientist or a lawyer or a marketing specialist, if we don't become the best in our field, we're wasting our time. I mean, there's no point telling you should do this, brother, and you should do that, brother. Go and do it. Get the skills to do that yourself, because we're all busy trying to build whatever we're trying to build. And so my job right now is to build this alternative financing ecosystem where we finance mid-sized businesses with a type of product that nobody else uses today. If I can make that become the de facto standard for the Islamic finance industry and have 2 billion people using it instead of a small group of professional investors today, that's where I want to be. That's my ambition. That's my mission, right? You go have your mission. You want to do it? Go and do it. That's your mission. Anyway, sorry, that's not really the answer that you're looking for. But okay, I'm going to call a close there. So let's, inshallah, meet next week. Thank you. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.